Hello again, and thanks for looking back at the channel. And even though it's a bit chilly, the sun's out and I'm having a little bit of fun on the vintage railway. And look at this lovely Ginty tank in that shiny LMS livery. I've increased the length of the little freight train we've seen on the layout quite recently, and it's going round beautifully. Now, I know I said I was going to be doing something else this week, but after a few of you commented last week, I've decided to complete the bull racing project on the X04 series motor. So look, you can see the black plastic worm on this. This is an X03 type motor, and indeed I have now got a front bull race in there. I hope you can see that, and if I can just get the light in there, there's one at the rear of the armature. So that's a plastic worm one, and then here's another one I've finished with the lovely brass worm. Now, the only difference from standard on these motors is both of the donors, the brush holders were broken, so I've just put some Paxolin type brush holders on, but they've got standard armatures, standard brushes, standard magnets. So apart from the brush holder, it's just the bearing conversion. So what I thought I'd do is probably get this one back to the bench, and I'll strip it down and show you how I got the bearings in, and then we'll run it. And what am I going to run it in? Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to run it in. Look on the upward main line and you'll see a couple of Southern coaches and a horse box and a tender there, and that is indeed the tender from Spitfire. Now, Spitfire has an X03 type motor in, so I thought it would be an ideal loco to try out the bull raced motor. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to take you over to the workbench in a minute. I'm going to show you the X03 type version of the motor stripped down so you can see how the bull races go in. I'm going to put it back together, slot it into Spitfire, and then run it round a little bit on these Super 4 main lines. But while I'm working away, I'm probably going to leave this little Ginty running around behind my back. I'll keep an eye on it. It's a superb little loco, this. Looks good with this mixture of Tri-ang and Wren rolling stock. And when you're working sometimes on the workbench, it's nice to hear something going round the layout. It sort of brings a bit of life into the room. Okay, well, I'm going to get a few tools together, and off camera I'll strip down this motor and lay out the parts, and we'll take a look at it on the workbench. Okay, well, we're on the bench. Now, I hope I can get these little bits that I want to show you in shot. Please bear with me a second if I have focus issues or something, but here we are, and look, there is the Spitfire chassis, and straight off here's the X03 that I've just taken out, and it's had no use at all. No felt rings for lubrication on the bearings of this, and already, even though it's hardly been used, it's got quite a bit of end float, and well, I don't think you'll hear it on this microphone because I've got that Ginty running around the layout, but there's a little bit of wobble in those bearings and you can hear it when you spin the armature. But I'm going to put that just out the way now, keep that safe. So I've got the one I showed you earlier all in pieces. So before we look at these other two, let's just quickly see if I can show you. Now, here's the back plate. So it's now got a shielded ball bearing race in it. You can see the old bearing. Now, I just popped the old bearing out, just pressed it out, and then just increase the size of the hole in this plate to take that bearing. Now, I'm not doing anything fancy. I just buy, these are good quality drill bits, and they're available in 0.1 of a mil size, so you can go right from when I say 0.1, I mean this, instead of being 4.5 mil and then 5 mil, you can go 4.6, 4.7, 4.8, 4.9. And once you find the size that suits your bearing, just slightly under the size of the bearing, you can drill your hole, then dress it up and press the bearing in. Now, if you accidentally make the hole, or you feel the bearing's a little bit slack, you can always resort to something like this. This is incredibly strong, this one. I'd probably only use this as a last resort, but it's a sort of thread lock or bearing fix type solution. You could just use a slightly weaker one. There's tons of this stuff around, but just a smidgen around the bearing as you press it in will hold it in all day long. Now, whoops, I just nudged that, didn't I? Now, when it comes to the front bearing, this is where I had a bit of trouble in the past. Now you can see I have drilled this out 5.9 millimeters, still leaves a bit on the edge. Now the reason I've had a bit of trouble is because the original bearings I wanted to use, already the front hole where the bearing here had come out was too big, and it wasn't until I found a 3 mil bearing, and when I say 3 mil, that's a 3 mil shaft size, that I could get a nice 6 mil outer size, which holds in really well. And to adapt it to the shaft, I've just got a little adapter. Now these sort of things you can buy from similar suppliers that I showed you last week that sell bearings for slot car racing. And indeed, if I can just pick it up and show you, this this bearing has got a rim on it just at the edge there, so I can press it up to that rim and it's nicely inside then the case. So I have the rim inside, I use my shaft adapter, and then I just put it all together. Now, because the rear bearing is a very tight interference fit on the shaft, that controls all the end float. So if I just try and show you here, it's not as easy as I want it to be. If I put this adapter onto the shaft, and that goes down very nicely down towards the commutator. You could put a little bit of thread lock on that if you wanted to hold it firm, but I haven't yet. And then you'll see that my 3 millimeter bearing, which wobbles on the shaft, as soon as it goes down onto the adapter, it's a very nice tight fit. And then that is going to go into here. Now it won't press in, I can't push it in with the commutator, and I don't want to because it would probably damage it, but I'm going to press that bearing in a minute, and that then is my front bearing. And when I use the rear bearing, that's a tight interference fit to the shaft, all the end float is controlled. But I'm going to build that back up in a minute and show you how it looks without the brushes in. But before we do that, I thought we'd perhaps just think about something for next time. Now here, this is, I've shown these before, this is the Airfix, I think it's the 1001 motor. It's a 5-pole motor, a lovely motor, almost a direct copy of the X04. I think they got around that by using a different brush arrangement, so that is different, but you can mount that, or mount a brush holder on the top there, and then use standard Tri-ang brushes. But anyway, there's a 5-pole armature in there. It's just touched that magnet, hasn't it? And here, oh, I'm getting all magnetized. Look, here is the X04 that I built up, and you can actually see the magnetic, it's so free that the magnetic force on the pole pieces just keeps it, it just flicks into a position and then returns back, even with the brushes pressing on the commutator. So it's a lovely free running thing. But what I thought for next week is I'll build a custom X04 using either a standard armature or a 5-pole one. You decide. Let's see in the comments which you'd like to see, and then let's have some suggestions for which Tri-ang or Tri-ang Hornby loco you'd like me to run with this hybrid motor in. So what I want to do is either build a 3 or 5 pole bearing race motor, and then I want you to tell me what loco should we put it in and try it on the layout. And maybe if I've got 2 of them, we could have a comparison with the standard motor and the motor I'm going to build. So that's the choice. I mean, personally, I think 5 pole could be fun, but there's nothing wrong with the standard 3 pole. Right, well, I think that's given you an idea of what's gone into this sort of bearing conversion. I'm just going to pause the filming for a minute. I can hear the jint is still going round okay, so that's good, but I'm going to press that front bearing in and just put the rear bearing plate in and the magnet and remagnetize it and show you how it spins. Okay, well, the bearings have pressed in nicely and I've put the worm on as well, remagnetized it. Look, if I just, you can see it flicking back now. I mean, they do that when they've got the standard bearings in, but it's just so smooth. When I just spin it, there's a complete difference in how it revolves. Absolutely no end float. What I've done is I've used, because the front of the motor looks differently now, the original bearings are off, I've just used the old motor to give me a guide how far to press the worm on. And there it is. That's a completely bull raced X03, X04 type motor. Just needs the brushes putting in, and then I'm going to put it into this Spitfire chassis. Right, well, I'm just going to do those final jobs, get that Spitfire back together, then join me on the layout and we'll see how it performs. Well, doesn't that Spitfire look good there against the platform with its 2 Southern coaches and horse box on? It's nice and quiet because the jint has been backed into the outer of the double track loop, so we haven't got too much noise, and I'm going to try and move this away as slowly as possible, so I hope it's in frame as I reach down to the controller. Just the smallest amount of power on. We're just creeping away now. I mean, it's always been a lovely runner, this Spitfire, but I just get the feeling it's going to be a bit smoother again with this bull race motor. So I'm just going to let it creep round before we put any more power on. There's a little bit of noise coming, but this sort of hollow, boxy body shell really does cause any sound to become amplified. Just going along by that Transcontinental now. So we're going to creep through the station. I think it's going to take too long to come round, so I'm going to increase the power a little bit. And there's a bit of traffic outside today. I'm wondering whether there's a diversion. They've been doing a bit of road repair, which is a bit overdue with some of the potholes. Here it comes. Centre points and a diamond to cross here. Smooth as silk. Lovely noise coming from the motor. Right, well, I think I'm just going to put a bit more power on. I'm going to leave it at that speed. So now I'm going to get the jinty out. So I need to open points B. And then just going to move that out. Okay, well, that's got them both running nicely. I must admit, I took a bit of time off to run a few trains the other morning, a bit slow in the workshop. and I just had tremendous fun with a couple of vintage items around this layout. Just look at that little Ginty. Wonder how that would run with a 5-pole bull race motor in it. There's so many Tri-ang models to choose from. Well, we're coming up to a train collectors, the Train Collector Society have got a show on in Leicester, and I'm hoping to get up there at the weekend. I'd love to go there and see all the older items, maybe have a look around some stalls and chat to a few people. So I'm looking forward to that. There's no doubt that there's some excellent shows on around the country all year round, whether you're into newer models or more vintage items. And it's a great way of seeing what's on offer and maybe picking up that elusive part you've been looking for some time. There are a couple of small items I'm hoping to see whether I can find. Right, well that Gint is going a little bit quicker than I want now, so I'm going to just slow that down a fraction. That's better. So now let's follow the Spitfire. Let's put a bit more power on. Well, I hope you've enjoyed seeing how I changed the original bearings in the X03, X04 type motor. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the sintered type bearings that are originally put in those motors. Some of them do have a little bit too much play in them, even from the factory I've found, but they're great and they run for a long time. I guess it was just a bit of fun to see whether it was possible to put something a little bit more precision into the old motor, just to see whether it would improve the smoothness and the slower speed handling. It's just a bit of fun with the older items. There's no doubt that most of my original items I will just leave as they came out of the factory. But it is good fun just seeing what you can do, combining something slightly newer inside these older locos. Well, as you can see, these are quite happily going round the main lines at some really nice speeds. I'm going to look forward to reading your comments, hearing which type of motor you'd like to see built up and maybe what you'd like to see it fitted to. Until then, I think I'm going to just finish off by saying goodbye, and I'll leave you with these two locos on the Tri-ang Super 4 main lines.